Today we're digging deep and running down a philosophical rabbit hole with the big guns of academia. Yes, we're joined by philosopher Lachie Green. Lachie's exploring questions like, is it morally wrong to get old? What are the realistic implications of seeing old age as morally wrong? And is aged care bad? If it's not, why are we so scared of it? Hello and welcome to an episode of Ironing Out the Wrinkles. I'm your host, Ros McMaster.
And I'm your host, Kate Shaw. Together we're taking the age out of ageism and helping men and women embrace life after 50 with less fear. Since starting as an assistant in nursing, Lachie Green has worked in the aged care sector for many years in a wide variety of roles. While working in the sector, he completed a philosophy degree and began a Ph.D. candidature in bioethics. In his studies, Lachie was curious that even though it's a common human experience, there was limited focus on ageing in philosophy. Since then, he's done a lot of philosophical thinking on the topic. Lachie's current research is focused on empowering social and ecological justice in aged care settings. His goal is to shift societal opinions on aged care and improve experiences for people as they age.
Lachie, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me and introducing me so kindly.
That's all right. We're a little bit daunted by the fact that you're a philosopher. We're a bit worried that we're going to get lost in that rabbit hole.
I don't think so. I don't think so. And looking at the people and hearing the people you've talked to, you guys are philosophers too, and the work that you're doing is philosophically incredibly important in this space. So don't be scared. I'm scared. You guys are big guns in this area.
We're the big guns in this area. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's true. All right, we're holding. Well, part of our podcast slogan is everything's better when we're doing it together.
Yes, that's right.
So that was a nice little intro for us. Thank you, Lachie. So let's dive right in. The rights and wrongs of aging. Is it morally wrong to get old? So why does society think about older people as burdens, from economics-driven mindsets through to the more philosophical factors?
Well, I mean, that's a really easy question to start with, I think, Ros.
Really?
Not really. No, not at all. I mean, it's an incredibly complicated space, as I'm sure you guys understand. You've talked to all these people, all these different perspectives on aging. There's some fundamental social questions to ask when we're talking about aging. And it really underpins this whole discussion of morally right, morally wrong. I guess the first question is, where does that question come from? Firstly, this is where this is what what's it all about? Why do we say? Why am I asking? Is it morally wrong? Unless prompted to do so. I guess we've got a lot of evidence to show that older people are not treated well in our society.
Yeah.
From statistics on homelessness, older women in homelessness, through to age discrimination in the workplace, and how hard it is to find a job after 50, even how hard it is to find a job after 40 for people. All of these different things, much less getting into that world of aged care and looking at all of the findings from the Aged Care Royal Commission, that found that 1 in 3 people in aged care experience substandard care, which ranges from everything from sort of failures in the day-to-day through to abuse, physical, sexual, financial abuse.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty safe to say that older people have a really rough trot of it in our society. So that's what prompted me to ask that question, and working in the sector and hearing people's experiences of being mistreated. You go, wow, what's going on here? Why is it so wrong to get old? That's the fundamental question. And there's a lot of philosophical questions that spin off this. This is the thing with philosophy, and what you guys as podcast hosts understand as well, is that any question springs a whole bunch of other questions.
Yes.
A whole bunch of other questions. So, in in the question, he said, is there an economic aspect to it? Is the way that we think about the world through this sort of economic production lens, is that a big part of it? I think so. I think that's one part of it, being that, as you get old, we start to assume that people can no longer be productive members of society, putting that in big inverted commas, because that itself has a whole bunch of questions linked to it. But it's an inherently social construct that we're talking about there as well. This productive member of society, even the term being old, older age, is a social construct, and obviously there are all these elements associated, with deterioration of certain parts of the body and all these sorts of things as we get past 50, as we get into older age. But why is an old person 65 or over? All of these questions also have these sort of philosophical and economic underpinning. So I didn't answer any questions there. I'm really sorry.
No, that's right. But it's, your point about, language is so important, isn't it? There was a commercial that was on TV about more than 10 years ago, and I can't even remember what it was for, but the slogan on the ad was not old, older. And I remember my daughter, she was 12 at the time, and she was always walking around saying it. So we can influence people from a very young age on the language they use, and then that sets up a perception for being older. But yeah, certainly ageism in the workplace is huge on those concepts you were just talking about, with people not being seen as productive anymore because of their age.
Yeah, I was talking to a lawyer yesterday, and really successful lawyer, and she's now in her 70s, and she was saying ageism is prolific. I was shocked. Even if you're a partner and you're in your 50s, you can't work the hours that the younger people do. They work extraordinarily long hours, but when you're older, you don't, for various reasons, and they sort of felt they were pushed away. They felt they had to retire. The subliminal messages.
I think because you get older too, you start prioritizing things.
Yeah, life's for living.
Why am I busting a gut for this company?
That's right.
You start not wanting to as much anymore.
And there are all those implicit factors that go into this, and we're talking about a whole system here. In the workplace, it's the workplace is almost easy because it's very clear. We're trying to get employment, we're trying to get promotion, all of these elements. And we can actually look at it and say, oh, older people aren't getting employed. They're not able to get back into the workforce if they leave, and they're not able to get the promotions that, as you say, that younger people are able to get. And that's because, as we're saying, we put very specific values on things as a society. And this is where this question of morally good, morally bad, morally right, morally wrong comes in. It's because it's all based in these values, social values. So, for instance, the ability to slog it out, long hours as a young person with no dependents, or with the priorities of someone who hasn't really got that that life worth living approach. Life worth living. Life's for living is what I meant to say there. But someone like that who's willing to put in those hours and do those really long things, as a society, we appreciate that sort of undivided attention in the workplace. Now, when you're older and you've started to rack up, a family and competing priorities in that space, then suddenly you're dividing your time more, and there's all of those elements, as well as this general social perception, which is, categorically not true, but that older people are less able. We tie getting old with becoming some degree of disabled. And there's all sorts of, problematic elements in that, in that, being disabled doesn't mean you can't do a whole variety of things, as well as the fact that old age doesn't necessarily bring disability. These aren't inherently linked concepts, but society links them anyway. So it's all of these questions of social values. And I'm sorry, I'm just bombarding you with all of these terms and these ideas, but it's really such a big, complex beast that really underpins this ageism that the podcast is.
That's
all
why
about.
They say when you're going for a job, you don't put your date of birth down, or you're not going to get an interview. I've been
Yes.
told that.
Yeah.
And we actually, I mean, I'm nearly 70 now, but if I was working, apparently older workers are known to be more loyal and work hard, super hard, and reluctant to go the extra miles without working 20 hours a day.
But it used to be like that in the old days. When you went to an employer, they could ask you if you were married or when you were
Yes.
planning to have children, because
That's
that would,
right, yeah.
that would influence them on, oh, well, she's going to have kids soon, so we know she's going
I
to end
remember
up
that.
wanting to go on
Yes.
leave. Yeah, and then they stopped them being able to ask you those questions too. So I mean, times do change, but I think from an economics driven mindset, it does very often come down to money. Like companies, if they think you're too old to be productive, that's about the bottom line too, isn't it? And they're paying high wages for you to be there, not being productive in their eyes. And even with aged care, like you were saying, the Royal Commission, there's just not money being put into aged care reforms. Even the Royal Commission, the recommendations, the government hasn't really committed to virtually any
No.
of that, putting the money in. They don't want to spend the money on old people. Sorry
it's
for the
true.
language. That's the language. In their mind.
Completely understand, and that's it. And old is a liability. That's how we view it. That's how we view it, and it's just unfair, firstly, but it's also just inaccurate. It's inaccurate, and it's all about these values. So if we were to pivot, let's just take the work context, stick on that one for one second. If we were to pivot what we see as valuable from that economic perspective, instead of maybe, having someone who'll just slog it out mindlessly, that obviously is that value because you're economically producing at a higher rate. Right? However, what's being missed in that is accumulated wisdom, accumulated knowledge of processes, accumulated, experience and loyalty as well. That's just not there. The value for that is just not there. So that's why we're so willing as a society or as a workplace, employers are so willing to hustle out their older employees to replace them with a bunch of younger people that'll just, that'll get in there and, just work. Because they're not thinking about all of the other values that are actually accumulated, the value that is accumulated as we age. We're not thinking about that. So in sense of going back to that first question about morally right, morally wrong, I do think I've come to believe that we as a society view aging as the wrong thing. It's a bad thing. It's a bad thing to do. You don't want to get old, and it comes out in all of these different elements, these different symptoms, I guess, of that. And part of that is this sort of fear of old age and all of these associated elements of old age, one of which is aged care. Yeah.
And I think this is the right time to be talking about all of it because I think back in 2006, 17 or 16 is when the UN became involved in the whole ageism debate. And there's a lot more being done now. And I don't think ageism's going to be as hard an ism to fight as what some of the others have been. And you see, even in the workplace now, employers are starting to make accommodations for people who need time off for families in emergencies, mental health days, and education around mental health. And I'm feeling really positive about the future as far as getting older, because I think there's going to be a lot more awareness and older people are stepping out and going, hey, we matter.
Yeah, and they ought to sort it out now in our generation because they're going to be here soon. All the younger people are going to find, hey, we're old. So sort it out now so it's good for them.
That's absolutely right. And this is why age discrimination, ageism makes absolutely no sense, because it is the only ism that we all grow into, right? It's the only ism we all grow into.
Yes, that's true. Otherwise, you're not here.
That's right. That's right. Like we can, blokes can other women because we're never going to be women, so we can subordinate women for centuries. there's at least some degree of awful logic behind it, right? But ageism doesn't have any basis in that logic because it's us. Everything that we do to every older person that's fired from a workplace, we're inherently firing ourselves. That's how I've come to think of this.
Yeah.
And this is this, the idea of, when it's in aged care, imagine if it's your mum that people throw around, they say when you're delivering a service, imagine delivering it to your mum. I said, no, imagine it being done onto you.
Yes.
That you don't even need to, obviously, you want your mum to be treated well, but we have a degree of selfishness. So why don't we think about it as us?
It's uncomfortable,
us.
Isn't it?
It is really uncomfortable, isn't it? It's great. I mean, I was going to say it's great, but it's a perspective that we need to have, is that the older person is us in X many years, or right now.
Yeah, but it definitely comes down to mostly to the money. And Kate's father, who we talked to, he's 93 and he's passionate about the whole aged care subject. And he was talking about everything that we're dealing with
too.
in life. Yeah, he is. Everything we're dealing with in life comes down to the dollar.
Yeah.
Every decision comes down
and
to the dollar.
And he is so grateful that he can live. Mum died a long time ago. He lives in a big family home thanks to the government with the care package. He would absolutely be mortified if he could not live in his family home. So he's lucky he's healthy enough he can. But I think that's another good thing that the government does to keep people in their homes.
We'll have a look at that down the track.
Yeah, so, but he is really doesn't see.
Yeah, and there's definitely I think that's a great point, which we'll come back to, Ros. I know, but I'll flag that whole point there, Kate, because it's really important.
So what's the realistic implications of seeing old age as morally wrong? Like how have the prevailing views impacted and what can we do about it?
Well, again, just a really easy question. But it's a, I've been flagging throughout there, it does all come down. So our value, or the lack of value, I should say, that we place on old age and older people as such, it really does have these realistic, real world impacts on how people are treated, and we're left with these unjust outcomes for older people, whether it be in the workplace or in the aged care sector or just on the street. There's been some great programs I've seen, where they can really test these attitudes, where they get, I think there was an SBS program where they had an older couple walk into a telco store, like into a phone store, and they did it to several stores, and they walked in and, each person was, oh, well, can I buy a phone? Said the older couple. And they immediately took them to the easy to use section. Little do they know that the gentleman in the couple, I think, was the head of an IT guru at some point in the it comes down to these parts and these assumptions of disability and these assumptions of incapacity. All of these things come because we just say as a society, oh, getting old's awful.
Yes.
Getting old's a bad thing. And then from that stems this whole tide of issues.
Yeah. And I suppose when you think about what can we do about something like that, as an example of that couple walking to the store owner probably could have said, well, what are you looking for?
Yep.
Like, let the person tell him something easy to use, or I'm good with technology. Don't make an assumption.
Don't judge a book by
absolutely. And it's this challenging of, I hate to, there's obviously a whole variety of scales of solution and scales of addressing a problem like this. What we can each do is challenge those assumptions, challenge when we say something. I'm sure you've got a whole podcast about it. The ageism aspect of it is, whenever you are, check yourself. Before you're about to say something to someone. It's the same advice that's given with all of the isms, all of the prejudices that we see. I mean, so there is obviously, there's that internal thing that we can all be doing, but there is also obviously bigger questions of, ensuring that funding is equitable, ensuring that hospital systems are set out in such a way that people can receive equitable care on the basis of age. A big part of it, age conditions that you have a higher likelihood of getting as you get older, such as dementia conditions. People living with dementia, particularly rurally, have no access to the services they need. So ensuring that those discrepancies are being addressed on a systemic scale is also important. And not to mention the important work that's still ongoing at the UN. We're in our we're over 10 years of open-ended working groups for the Convention on the Rights of Older People now. So getting to that goal and enshrining the rights of older people at an international level, there's another one that we can be doing. So there's a whole scale of different ways that we can be addressing these sorts of inequities.
In your sorry,
No,
Kate,
you go on.
in your studies, did you look at other cultures as far as how they treat aged, and do they even have aged care? Because the Western world, is it just my imagination? We have a terrible reputation for the way we treat our older population compared
No, you're
to
dead on.
other.
No, you're absolutely right. Look, I've never looked in depth into it in my own studies, but I have read other people's accounts of this sort of stuff. And you're right in assuming, aged care, especially in a residential context, doesn't exist outside of, hasn't historically existed outside of Western cultures. Coming from, we've been really in Europe and in America and in Australia, we've just been really keen to get all those old folks into a single place where we can just put them all there and forget about them. Whereas there are, in plenty of other societies, there is a deep respect, especially across African and Asian cultures. There's a respect for your elders.
I love that.
Yes.
It's absolutely, it's just wonderful. And, even the term elder in Australian, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures, the term elder is a term of endearment. It's a term of there's a whole wide range of implications for what that term actually means, what it contains.
Respect, wisdom, community, everything. Yeah. I remember I had a Japanese exchange student staying with me once, and I said, "Oh, my parents are coming over for dinner tonight." And she was so excited and going to get ready. And she said, "Oh, like in Japan, if the grandparents were coming, it was such an occasion." I said, "Oh yeah, well, it's just probably have a sausage or something." Like, it was no
That's
big deal,
lovely.
but she was so excited that the
upbringing.
grandparents were coming for dinner.
I've got a question too that I've noticed. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just seem to notice that a lot of people, as they get older, they really lose their confidence. And I'm wondering, is there anything that we can do to try and make people have a little bit more self-belief and don't be afraid to speak up? In your work, you've picked any tips up?
Oh, that's a really hard one, because people lose their confidence because all of this stuff we've talked about so far is being pressured into them, like you would be stuffing, sausage into a sausage casing, for your parents' rolls. But but all of these values, these social values, and this is across all sorts. This is psychoanalytic stuff, that Freud goes back all the way to bloody Freud and all that sort of good stuff. But these ideas of socialization and becoming a social subject, it means you're taking in all this stuff from around you, all of these beliefs, all of these value propositions about how useless old people are and how how much, oh God, they're so incapable and all this sort of stuff. And you're shoving it into your own brain, or it's being pressed into your brain as you are living in a society. As you're going around your day to day, you're seeing the media that portrays old people as infirm and frail, and you're getting all of these fears drummed into you about aged care and how horrendous it all is. All of that stuff you're being battered with. So then the confidence piece and this self-belief, one day maybe you look in the mirror and you say, my goodness, I've spent my whole life trying not to have wrinkles, but now look at me, I've got wrinkles and 4 grey hairs, and my world's coming crashing down because I know that I am now going to be useless and incapable and all of these things, and they'll put me in one of those horrendous aged care facilities. So there becomes a desperate need to project that all is fine, firstly, that I'm still young, that all is fine, which is then linked to not asking for help when you may need it. You're then, then these things actually do start to realize it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, because being able to get just a little bit of help may actually stop a deterioration of your mobility or something. And then you're stuck in home, and then, and then it happens. Then you are incapable, and you do end up in aged care, which isn't horrendous, but all of these things happen. So it's this idea that you need to actually, and this is really, really hard, and it's actually much easier to do for those of us that are younger, to actually start challenging those beliefs internally from earlier on. But sometimes, when you're at that stage and the confidence is gone, as you say, Kate, and you don't have that self-belief anymore, maybe, the question is, why do I not have this anymore? What's going on? What conclusions am I jumping to about myself that is stopping me, that are sapping my confidence, that are making me not believe in myself?
Are they lies, or is it true? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it true? Is that really going to happen? Because even, people's fear of dementia, well, we'll have to have someone on to talk about dementia, because so many people are frightened of dementia, but the statistics of how many people actually end up with dementia is pretty low. So
is it? That's
good. It's an unrealistic fear, really.
Yeah, and it is. Look, dementia, and there are genuine, as we've shared, in the past, throughout, there are genuine things that are scary about growing older, and there are conditions such as dementia that are linked to greater occurrences as we age, as wear and tear starts to get at our body and these sorts of things. There will be an increased chance that you have a condition like that. And dementia is scary. Dementia is a scary condition. It's scary for people living with it. It's scary for families, all of these things. However, being really afraid of it as a society, old age, dementia, all of these things, doesn't make it easier for anybody.
No.
Stigmatizing old age, stigmatizing dementia just makes it way harder. And it makes you feel like you're doing something wrong at the same time. So then you end up feeling guilty.
You need to have someone to say, here are the good points about getting older, because there must be lots of good things just as much as negative.
Absolutely.
Which we're doing here, which is fabulous.
That's right.
But I mean, that we keep sort of bringing up the topic of aged care, which it is a big one, and like so many people are afraid of aged care. So, and you've worked in aged care, you've done your thesis in aged care. So, is aged care bad? And if it's not, why are we so afraid of it?
That is just that is another huge question, and I think it is. Look, aged care isn't bad. Aged care isn't bad. There's no. It's like saying that hospital care is bad. It's not inherently bad, aged care. Now, there's a difference in whether it is bad as a concept or bad as an institution or all these sort of things, versus is it bad in practice? And I would argue that the answer to both of those questions is no. Aged care in Australia, the Royal Commission into Aged Care Quality and Safety did point out that there are some serious systemic problems facing the sector is facing. But the average provider is doing good stuff. Aged care workers are doing good stuff out there. There is some really, really, really good providers doing really, really good things. And I think that is probably more the norm than we would give the sector credit for.
I'm
That's
breathing
not.
a
That's
sigh
a
of
relief.
relief
Me
right
too.
now.
I was just thinking the same thing.
I was like holding
goodness.
my breath because we hear so much negative press, but that's the thing.
Yes,
Why is
That
it
the
always
media
there?
is all
Mm.
about telling us bad
that's
news.
right.
And so the small number of people that are not doing the right thing, it dampens the reputation of the many who are. So
Always the
Yeah.
way. Mm.
And we've talked already about there are all sorts of big system-wide problems that are facing the sector as well. Like, and a lot of it goes back to what we were talking about before, the values associated with growing old and how we don't value it. And that goes away to explaining, you know, why is there no workforce to go and work and help people who are as their age? Well, why would you do that when you can get paid 25% more to work in the NDIS? And a big part of that comes down to the value we put on these workers that is inherently tied to the value we put, or we see old age and older people having. Sorry. See, I'm just perpetuating my own stereotypes in my head, but it's all of these questions of value, that there's these big question marks at a government level, at a legislative level, that are really impacting on providers.
yeah, absolutely. And a lot of it, again, it came down to money. Like a lot of the staff now, they only had to do a 6-week training course in aged care to go and work in a care facility. So they didn't have the right training, and they took nurses out of care facilities. And now I think as part of the reforms, they're putting one nurse back in to each facility on a full-time basis. But it's still probably not enough for, what the people who are in those aged care facilities need. But I think why we're so scared of it too is that if we're being subject to abuse, people off and if we complain about it in aged care while we're there, I say
vulnerable.
yeah, people are like,
Vindictive
they're
and vulnerable.
making that up. Yeah, so you're not believed because you're older.
Or imagining it.
I think it's that fear of loss of dignity and being vulnerable.
Yes,
And
very
the
much so.
loneliness. And the
Yes.
loneliness.
Yes, very
Yeah.
much so. Because everyone needs interaction, social interaction as a human.
Yeah.
And to feel loved and appreciated.
Absolutely. And on all those points,
Mm.
dignity, love, all of these things. And this is what we forget when we're talking about aged care so often, is that it is a human services sector where we have humans caring for humans, and it all comes down to these human emotions, human feelings, human interactions. That's what it's all about. That's the name of the game in aged care. And I think you're right. I think you're right, Ros, on that as well, in that people are really afraid of losing their dignity, of being in those really vulnerable situations. And this is the thing. So where we are with aged care at the moment is that we've got a sort of full suite of different types of funding and different types of services that is, if you ask me, really confusing and really hard to get your head around. And we have all sorts of websites to help with that, like My Aged Care, which are also really confusing and hard to get your head around.
Especially when you're older.
Acronyms. Oh yeah. Not that we make that assumption. Okay.
No, that's me. I'm just thinking of myself. I'm a dodo with technology, but this one here is a genius.
Well, I mean, I find it. Look, I work on computers all day, and I find the My Aged Care website really hard to get around and really hard to access information from.
There are so many links to click.
Oh,
like, just get me where I want to be.
And the acronyms, I tell you, the acronyms. The insistence on putting acronyms to absolutely everything. You've got your CHSPs assessed by your RAS, and then you've got your ACATs assessing your RACs and your HCPs, so all of these different things. But fundamentally, what you've got is you've got care that's delivered in the home, and then care that's delivered in a facility. So boiling it right down to that. So in the home, like we were saying before, Kate, there's a range of these ones, each with their own acronym, as I said, but there's a range of these funding types. designed to help people maintain independence and stay at home for as long as they can. And this is this philosophical, well, sorry, I say philosophical, or this political push for what is called aging in place. Aging in place is the term that's used. So growing older in the place where you are, which is a great idea. You know, being able to stay in your family home for as long as possible is wonderful and is a really great concept if it was totally realistic, which, you know, there are a lot of question marks around, because we get to points, you know, if our mobility has decreased and our frailty has increased, we can get to the point where living in our own home. So maybe we're in the family home that we had the kids in and all these sorts of things. It's got 4 bedrooms, it's got stairs, it's got all of these different ideas, you know, all of these different things that make it a pretty hostile place to lose your mobility in, to become frail in. And then we talk about these ideas of loneliness and stuff. Suddenly this family home that you love so much is actually becoming a cage. You know, it's becoming a cage because getting down the front stairs is becoming harder. You know, getting up to go to the bathroom, being able to, you know, maybe it's situated out in the suburbs. And if you're in Brisbane, you know, out in the suburbs means, you know, you need a car. There's suddenly, you know, if your vision's deteriorated and you can't drive anymore, then suddenly your life space, I've heard it described as the space in which you live, shrinks immensely to be the size of the house that you're living in. So that sounds really, I'm sorry to be very, that sounds very fatalistic and very pessimistic, but it's not necessarily pessimistic.
Yeah,
Because
it's realistic and practical. Well, you know, the question was, is aged care bad? Like now it's like, is staying at home bad?
Yeah, that's right. Not always.
Well, no,
now I'm worried about staying at home.
You worry about everything. We can be afraid of everything. And look, I mean, this is part of it is, you know, reconceptualizing aged care to be not just in the residential aged care facilities. It's actually this whole range of different programs in a whole variety of different settings that provide all sorts of different things. Inherently, aged care is just, you know, support for you if you are an older person. That's what aged care is.
Yes,
there's a huge range.
Care is what you need. So it's about really meeting the needs of the person and where they're at. Is essentially what you were saying.
Absolutely.
So, Lachie, just to round off, I mean, you chose to study aged care. That's what your thesis was, and you worked in the area for a long time. What drew you to do the thesis? Were you discontent with what you were seeing while you were working in the industry?
I think it actually goes more, Ros, to being really thrilled with some of the work I was seeing. Being really, you know, ecstatic at some of the developments that are happening in residential aged care, particularly at the moment. These different models of care that are being innovated, these different connections that people are making, you know, all of these incredible developments. And then looking at the Royal Commission and the media's portrayal of the sector, like we were saying, and going, hang on, this is not the sector that I've worked in. You know, this is not what sector I've worked in. And then looking at the research more broadly and seeing no one's really thinking about aged care in a philosophical sense. You know, there's a lot of work. I should say there's a lot of really great work being done in the sciences. A lot of really great work being done, you know, by people across allied health and nursing fields. Absolutely. There's so much good work there, but the philosophical foundations of the sector are not being questioned. You know, these different values that are being prescribed, you know, the value of aged care, the value of people in aged care, and what a person, you know, this sort of idea that a person is just sort of diminished to the subject within a facility. Sorry, talking in sort of theoretical terms there, but I wanted to ask questions about how we can how we can have aged care facilities looking at the good stuff that's being done, absolutely, and saying, you know, what are the philosophical underpinnings of this good stuff? But that's the question I'm wanting to ask. Beyond the actual practicalities of making it happen and the positive outcomes that people are getting from it, what's the meat of the morality behind all of those things? So they're the questions that I'm looking at. They're not easy questions to answer. That's why I'm writing a PhD.
We need your positivity, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there's a lot of people would be interested in reading that thesis. Is there going to be a link you provide me for people to access that?
Oh, we're a way off from a link yet, Ros. But there will be there'll be stuff available across the course of as we're writing it. But,
we can add it down the track as we go.
We may. That's right.
Well, we're going to bring that to a close, Lachie. Thank you so much for joining us today. That was really interesting.
I loved hearing the positivity. It's always, as you say, the press, doom and gloom, but it's not all doom and gloom at all, is it?
Yeah, I feel much better about
Me
it
too.
now, and I'm sure our listeners do too. Have you got just one last words of wisdom for anyone who's getting older and might be fearing heading down that path to aging?
I think my only words of wisdom would be just really interrogate why you're feeling afraid, and just ask that question, will this fear stand in the way of me getting help that could potentially, keep me in my own home, keep me out of aged care facilities, all of these sorts of things. So just ask those questions of yourself.